Hello everyone. Welcome to Recap Queen. In this video, we will explain Cold Skin. This movie tells the story of a meteorologist traveling to the Antarctic Circle's remote regions to work as a weather observer, but finds himself trapped amongst dangerous creatures living on the island. Will he finally get out of the place alive? Let's find out in Cold Skin. Cold Skin tells the story of a young British national who travels in 1914 across the Atlantic Ocean to a remote island to work for a year as a weather observer. Arriving on the island, the young man disembarked with the captain of the ship and several crew members who helped him transport goods and supplies to a small cabin by the sea where he would live for the whole year. Supposedly, the captain escorted the young man and picked up the previous weather observer who had been on duty since a year ago. However, they did not find the man's whereabouts and the situation in the cabin was very messy. The young man and the ship captain tried to find the previous weather observer by walking along the coast until they finally saw a lighthouse and tried to find it there. The young man noticed that the lighthouse looked strange because the walls were filled with spiky bamboo as if it was made in such a way for defense. When the young man and the ship captain visited the lighthouse, they met a lighthouse keeper named Gruner. Gruner said the weatherman who stayed in the cabin might have died of typhoid or might have drowned at sea, so they couldn't find the body. Suspicious of Gruner and sniffing something strange, the ship's captain advised the new weatherman to return with him to England, but he refused and continued his work. The unnamed youth then explored the island and saw a strange stone circle on the beach. When the young man returned to the cabin in the afternoon, he began to prepare the equipment he would use to observe the weather. After that, he unpacked the belongings of the previous weather officer, who was identified as Aldor from a diary he wrote during his stay on the island. The young man also found a photo of Aldor's late wife. In his journal, Aldor recounts his experiences while living on the remote island. However, Aldor's writings in the journal are getting less and less, until finally only showing images of creatures from the ocean that are very strange. After spending the afternoon doing a little weather observation on the seafront, the young man then returned to his cabin when it was getting dark. That night, he heard a knock on the cabin door. When he was about to check who visited his cabin at night, he accidentally saw a webbed foot sticking out from under the door. Without thinking, he then hid in the basement while observing a mysterious creature that came to his cabin from the gap in the wooden planks on the floor. The strange creature finally appeared and the young man directly stabbed him. After the incident, the young man decided to stay hidden in the cellar until morning. The next day, the young man came out of hiding and found his cabin in a state of disarray. The young man found many webbed footprints on the sand when walking out, indicating that the strange creature did not come alone. The young man then headed to the lighthouse and asked Gruner for help to be allowed to live there, but Gruner ignored him. Due to rejection from Gruner, he then fortified his cabin with pointed bamboo and closed all the windows with boards to deal with attacks from these strange creatures. Night came. The young man had prepared in his cabin with weapons that he believed were sufficient to withstand the attacks of strange creatures that came from the sea. But in reality, he was even overwhelmed by shooting the herd of strange creatures because there were so many of them. Until in the end he decided to burn the pile of wood that he had prepared. This indeed succeeded in driving away the swarms of strange creatures, but instead burned his cabin. So the young man was forced to get out of there to save himself and hide in the cracks of the rocks until sunrise. The next day, the young man observed Gruner leaving the lighthouse and followed him into the rocky area. While hiding in the rocks, the young man was attacked by a strange creature. However, when he was about to kill her with a gun, Gruner stopped him by saying that the female creature was harmless. Finally, he gave up his intention to kill the female creature, after reaching an agreement with Gruner that allowed him to live in the lighthouse with him. When they arrived at the lighthouse, Gruner gave the young man a name, namely Friend. There, Friend sees Gruner treating the female creature like a pet, where he also explains that the female creature is like a dog and will not abandon her master, no matter how cruel Gruner is treating her. Since Gruner had allowed Friend to live with him, the female creature then considered Friend as her master as well and licked her injured hand. Friend then offers to share ammunition and other equipment with Gruner if he can stay at the lighthouse, which Gruner accepts immediately. Friend carved an inscription on the lighthouse wall, where he would start counting the days since he lived with Gruner. The night arrived. Gruner asks Friend to get ready for an attack from a swarm of strange creatures that continue to terrorize them at night. However, that night was the first time for Friend to face and see directly what kind of creature had attacked him since he set foot on the island, which made him freeze in fear and unable to do anything, until he finally fainted. The following day, Gruner, angry at Friend's helplessness the night before, berates and tells him to do menial work like fetching water instead. Friend is no longer a weather watcher who hopes to carry out his duties quietly for a whole year until he is finally picked up home. Friend realizes that he must learn to face his fears because his life now depends on his ability to defend himself from attacks by swarms of strange creatures. On the other hand, Friend feels increasingly sorry for the female creature who is always physically and sexually abused by Gruner. That night, when the creatures attack again, Gruner purposely locks Friend on the outside balcony with his weapon and leaves him to see if he can fight alone against the creatures and prove his worth. At first, Gruner hesitated because he thought Friend was a weak young man. However, Gruner's doubts are answered the following day when he finds Friend alive, even though his body is covered in blood. Since then, Gruner and Friend have worked together to eradicate the swarms of these strange creatures every night, which eventually became their daily routine. Gruner and Friend even felt strange when the creatures' attacks suddenly stopped and they didn't appear at all for some time. Even so, the two of them kept watching every night. One night, when Gruner and Friend were relaxing because they thought the herd of creatures would not attack, suddenly the creatures came and attacked them when both of them were off guard. Unprepared, Gruner and Friend are nearly killed when the swarm of creatures rushes in and rushes them above the lighthouse. The two then tried to save themselves by hiding in the lighthouse light room. Gruner was badly bitten in the leg, but he was still able to reach the room. Because they felt safe enough, the two of them hid there until dawn because the herd of creatures would return to the sea in the morning. Long story short, because they have lived together for a long time, Friend starts trying to be close friends with the female creature he calls Anaris. Friend then showed Anaris a piece of whale bone that he carved into a ship-like shape while they were strolling on the beach. After realizing the shape of the ship, Anaris then took Friend to a covered boat. Friend then informs Gruner of the boat's whereabouts, which Gruner already knows about. Gruner said that the boat belonged to a Portuguese crew member who intended to save themselves from the sunken ship. But when the crew arrived on the island, the herd of creatures killed the Portuguese man. Gruner then said that one of the cargo of the shipwreck contained dynamite. Upon hearing this, Friend seems interested in exploring the sunken ship and tries to convince Gruner to come with him. Long story short, Gruner and Friend then use a boat to row to the wreck area. Since this was Friend's idea, he had to put on an old wetsuit and dive to find a chest filled with dynamite. Friend manages to find some chests filled with dynamite and Gruner rushes them onto the boat. When Friend was about to return to the boat, he accidentally met a sea creature who looked like Anaris, but in the children's version. Because of that, Friend slipped and fell on the seabed. Luckily, he was able to find the eject button in his wetsuit, allowing him to return to the surface. Once Gruner and Friend return to the lighthouse, they find that the dynamite they found on the sunken ship is dry enough to use. Without further ado, they planted the dynamite around the lighthouse area, and intended to blow it up when a herd of strange creatures surrounded it. However, their preparations seemed to be in vain, because the strange creatures never came and disappeared again temporarily like some time ago. Unknowingly, it had been 3 weeks since they had planted the dynamite and the creatures had not arrived. During that time, Gruner seemed to vent his frustration on Anaris by torturing the female creature, so Friend had to intervene because he thought Gruner had gone too far. Gruner and Friend then devise a plan to lure as many sea creatures as possible to the lighthouse before detonating the dynamite. Gruner deliberately tortures Anaris and drags her to the balcony, then forces the female creature to wail to attract the attention of her flock. Gruner's actions then make Friend wonder if the herd of creatures keep coming to the lighthouse because they want to reclaim Anaris, who lives suffering from being tortured by Gruner. Friend is curious as to why Anaris can stay with Gruner and be so loyal to that man. Sure enough, not long after that, swarms of creatures resembling Anaris were storming the lighthouse from all directions, until Gruner and Friend were overwhelmed by all of them. As they pressed further, Gruner failed to detonate the dynamite, so Friend had to run to the top of the lighthouse to reconnect the detonator. After Friend managed to reconnect the detonator, a huge dynamite explosion was inevitable and killed the swarm of creatures, though not entirely. Gruner then detonates another dynamite closer to the lighthouse, causing Friend and himself to pass out. In the morning, Friend saw the bodies of these creatures strewn around the lighthouse. Without thinking, Gruner did not hesitate to kill the injured and dying creatures lying on the beach with a bayonet. Friend tries to stop him because he thinks that Anaris and her herd are not savages like Gruner told him. Gruner finally reveals that he found Anaris many years ago when Anaris was trapped in his fishing net. Gruner then saves Anaris and thinks she owed him her life since then, so Anaris has been very loyal to him. At night, the creatures did not attack them, but there was a loud wailing sound coming from the sea, which Friend thought was a mourning wail, and suddenly Anaris disappeared. The next day, while Gruner is still sleeping, Friend finds a photo of a young Gruner with his wife, which looks exactly like the photo of Aldor's late wife. Since then, Friend finally finds out that Gruner has been lying to him by hiding his identity, that he is Aldor, the weather watcher who was assigned before him. But Friend plans to keep it a secret to himself and doesn't say anything to Gruner, even though he already knows Gruner's true identity. Towards evening, Friend decides to take a walk on the beach and meets a creature who is like a child, and behind the creature, Anaris appears and looks more confident and brave. Friend seemed relieved that Anaris' condition seemed to improve after the female creature returned to her flock. However, the moment where Friend tries to make peace with the Anaris herd suddenly becomes heated because Gruner suddenly attacks the creature. Friend tries to tell Gruner that Anarus and her gang want a truce, but Gruner rejected it outright and ordered Anarus to return to him. As Anarus refuses to return to Gruner, he then returns to the lighthouse and shoots a flare at the creature, which hits him in the chest and kills him. Friend then asks Anarus to return to the herd, while he tries to stop Gruner. Friend then chases Gruner into the lighthouse and fights the man. However, Gruner was better at fighting than Friend, so he could easily take him down. When Gruner is about to kill Friend with an axe, Friend reveals that Gruner is Aldor, the former weather officer, and says he is not a murderer. Gruner dropped his axe as soon as he heard Friend's words and stumbled outside to be killed by the swarms of creatures that had been after him. A few months later, and it's been a year since Friend lived on that remote island. Finally, the next ship arrives to replace Friend. The ship captain visits the lighthouse and thinks that Friend is Gruner because he is at the lighthouse, but Friend did not correct him. The ship captain then inquired about the whereabouts of the previously assigned weather watcher, and Friend answered as Gruner had said the first time they met. Friend had pondered that this was the peace he had initially sought and decided to stay on the island. Since Gruner's death, Anarus and the herd were never seen again.